Welcome to Engender Love. I'm your host, Dr. Shannon Puncy. Join me as we discuss all things gender so you can better connect with those around you. So let's get started as we engender love. I had a healthcare provider come to me, and when they learned what I did, that I was a gender educator, and they came to talk to me about how they felt embarrassed. They felt embarrassed because they knew they did not know and understand gender. They wanted to, but they didn't. And they felt like it's something they should understand. They're a physician, they're a healthcare provider, and they recognize that gender and gender diversity is a part of biology. But they didn't know, and they felt like they had a hard time even saying, I don't really know or understand, and felt like it was an inadequacy of themselves. And so with that feeling, when they went in, if they had a transgender or non-binary patient to see, they often talked about getting nervous and not knowing what to say and freezing up and just feeling like they were awkward. They weren't their usual selves. And the first thing I had to say to this provider, and it's not the only one, I've heard this story many times from many different providers, is that it makes sense that they don't know. It makes sense that they don't have the knowledge because it only has been recently that medical schools are starting to incorporate it into training. And most, well, I can't get a clear number on how many are. I can get an idea how many report and things like that, but the response rate for reporting is so low. So maybe at best, a comprehensive education is reported, last I saw in 2022, in 4 medical institutions. Now, other medical schools may mention transgender health, may talk or educate, but all of this has been in more recently incorporated into the general education. Many places it's still elective, meaning that you could go through medical school and not have to take any courses on gender. So it made sense because I don't believe this physician ever had an opportunity for that education. And then on top of it, how we're raised is not consistent with the accurate information on gender. And that's because it wasn't known, it wasn't understood at the time. And it is now. So it makes sense that this healthcare provider doesn't know. And that I thought it was amazing that they recognized it was part of biodiversity, that they wanted to know, that they wanted to learn, and that they were able to tell me that they were able to admit, I really feel like I should know this and I don't, because that is the first step to being able to learn, to being able to do better. You have to be able to say, this is what I don't know. And so if that is like you, if you're like, I want to know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know, and I get uncomfortable, then I want to say to you too, it makes sense. Even though gender diversity, meaning transgender, non-binary identities, and similar identities, gender diversity, have been reported since the start of time. Since the start of time, we have history of things in many different cultures all around the world. And as a healthcare, we've lagged behind in our understanding. It was interesting for me to find out that the medical school I attended had a gender clinic since 1995. I never knew. I wasn't educated at all. In fact, I had a professor who now in hindsight I recognize was transitioning. We were all wondering why she changed her name to her initials. I just made a mistake there. I don't know what their pronouns are now. I know that's not what they are. I know that's what they were at the time, but now let me be more respectful. And since I don't know if they go by he or they, I'm going to choose they. Um, And I will say that I didn't know they were going through a transition at the time because I didn't know anything about gender at the time. It wasn't taught. And there it was happening right in front of me. And we all wondered why this professor had such a masculine gender expression. And even that I wouldn't have had the language for at the time, that it was a gender expression. But why were they dressing so masculine? And why were they going by their initials instead of their first name? And I met this professor many years later at a conference, and I was able to thank them for for educating what they did, but we were not educated, even with the professor. And not that it's their responsibility, whoever the transgender, non binary healthcare providers are, it's not their responsibility to teach. But my point was, there it was right in front of me, and I didn't have the language for it. And even though my institution had a clinic, I got no education on it. So again, it makes sense because medicine, Western medicine, often thought of gender diversity as a pathological problem. The tide began, and even though at the time there were treatments, there were things being done to help people get into alignment with themselves, but we saw it as a pathology. And it's interesting because it's 1995 was the first published study that ever showed a female brain structure within a person that was assigned male at birth. And it was not influenced by hormones. I'm going to say this again. There's an area of the brain that we know is different between men and women, cisgender men and cisgender women. And when they looked at it, they noticed that that there was a brain of a transgender woman, so somebody assigned male at birth, identified as a woman, that fell into the range of female for that structure. And so this was the first evidence that there was a different morphology of the brain, and that was 1995. And it wasn't until 2013 that the American Psychiatric Association took out what was then called gender identity disorder. Gender identity disorder meant if you were transgender, and basically it was if you were transgender, not non-binary at the time, but if you had gender diversity, if you were transgender, that was a pathological problem. That's what that signified. In 2013, they finally agreed and came to the realization to change that it's not a psychological disorder, it's a normal biological variation. But what can be a psychological distressor is how people are treated, how they're perceived, how they feel in their body with that misalignment of their identity compared to their what they were assigned at birth. And so instead of it being a problem to be transgender, it was recognizing the distress someone might feel from being transgender, and also recognizing that some of that not only comes from may come from a person's body, but it comes from society as well and how a person is treated. But being transgender itself was recognized not to be a pathology. 2013, 11 years ago. And so healthcare, medicine in particular, is a little slow to catch up in general. And so it makes sense that many physicians I'm talking to haven't been trained. We're just starting to get it incorporated into the education. And even so, there's question how effective it is and it isn't. So if you are like my friend that came up and spoke to me, and you also feel this way, it makes sense if you don't know. And just because you don't know doesn't mean you have to continue not knowing. Because many people, like my friend, are horrified to hear some of the statistics. Like the 2022 US Trans Survey, the preliminary results have come out that out of all the transgender non-binary people surveyed that received health care in the last 12 months prior to this survey that they filled out, 48% of them that had sought care had a negative experience. So, meaning half the time within a year of seeking healthcare, a person who is transgender non binary would have a negative experience. That's really high. The only statistic I could compare it to was a study done out of, I think, the University of Chicago, where they looked at cisgender people, it appeared to be in their group, and in 5 years, five, not one, five, it was about a 32% reported rate of a negative experience. It took 5 years to get to 32%. In the transgender non-binary community, it took 1 year to get to almost half. Now, I don't say this to shame the healthcare community. I say this as a motivation to do better because I know we can do better. We can do better with education and training. And I believe that the majority of healthcare providers want to do better. They want to do better. And for those talking to me that want to do better, they're somewhat worried that they are part of the problem, that they're going to create a negative experience. They don't want to create a negative experience for any patient. But again, if we think about that description of getting nervous, being worried, fumbling over your words, showing up awkward, it makes sense that some things may end up in a negative experience. By trying not to create a negative experience, we do exactly that. And so I think education and training is really, really helpful. So, what can you do if you're one of these providers that wants to know and learn more? I think it's important to do the learning to understand gender. If you go back to episode 2, you get a very preliminary teaching of just what gender is, gender identity, and what it's not, differentiating it from gender expression and biological sex. And this is important because we're raised to think these three things are one and the same, that they all go together as one. And when we recognize the three separate entities that are associated with each other, but they're not the same thing, then we begin to have greater understanding of gender. Then we can work on where we might make an assumptions by thinking the three things are the same, and how we can and honor these three things as separate part of each person's identity. And then further going on to understand gender, to understand what it means, and not just many providers like, tell me what I shouldn't say, tell me what I should say and what I should not say. And I think what's more important than that is to understand why. Why would somebody not want you to say that? Why would somebody be okay with saying that? And so that's some of the learning that has to take place. And that's why I created the courses I do. That's why I do grand rounds and lunch and learns, to begin to create the awareness of what these things are. But awareness is one thing, it's learning and really learning to apply it, which means reflecting on it, reflecting how this is different than what you thought gender was, and going through that. Where do your beliefs show up incorrectly with the knowledge of gender that we have now? Where might that come out in the language that you speak? Like, most of us, if not all of us, maybe not all, but most of us grew up under thinking that gender was a binary. So it is not uncommon for those of us raised thinking gender is a binary to use very binary language. And so those are the things to begin to challenge. Who are we excluding? What does this mean? Why am I using, or even gendered language? Why am I using this? Am I using the term women to represent an experience which all women may or may not have, like having periods or having babies? Getting more specific, understanding where we're making assumptions. And I think that will help not just your transgender non-binary patients, but all your patients, because that's what I think is really great about gender and understanding it, is you begin to honor and see and hear your patients as individual. It teaches us not to make assumptions and to really understand our learning. So I digress. So learning's important, reflection's important, implementation is important, beginning to apply it, beginning to look at the language you use. Where could you change to be more inclusive? Where could you use language that would be open for people to come as they are, and not assume who they are, but open the door to say, whoever you are, you tell me. That's the implementation. And then the final thing is support. You need support. It's an ongoing. I love giving grand rounds and doing lunch bunches because it creates awareness, but that doesn't create change. The awareness is amazing. And then you've got to take that awareness, implement it, but also have a place where you can ask questions. It's not one and done, it's a learning process. You'll start to become aware of those things you want to change, the things like, wait a second, is this right or is that right? Like, I don't understand. And you need a place for that support to ask those questions, to gain greater understanding, to be able to have someone reflect back to you, give you feedback, to be able to say, hey, this is how I handled this. What do you think about this? How could I do better? And that is what I mean by support. So if you're a person that's interested in making change, and I will tell you, I think it will help all of your patient care to do the work. It is learning, reflecting, implementing, and getting support. And so it sounds like a lot, maybe to some people. And especially right now, I think it feels like I don't have any more time for any extra things. This doesn't have to take a lot of time. These aren't difficult concepts. It's just a matter of hearing them, learning them, and then you become more aware. You'll see where to apply them. You'll start being like, wait, if this is true, then how do I talk about this, right? Like, if somebody is not what they're assigned at birth, then how do I talk about that? How do I differentiate it from gender identity? Or if somebody has transitioned and they're transgender, for example, how do I ask about their medical history before they were living as their true selves? So those are all the things to get support in that you'll start becoming aware. And I teach them through courses. I teach them through grand rounds, but I'm not the only one. What's important, if this is what you want to do, is find the resource that speaks to you. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It takes the reflection, it takes some time. It takes the acceptance that it will be a learning curve, like everything else in healthcare and medicine. Have a great week.